So in this session, we want to talk about knowledge gap hypothesis and the theory of information rich and information poor. Let's look at what these concepts mean and what are the features. Knowledge gap theory states that wealthier and more educated people acquire information from mass media faster than lower socioeconomic classes. That's the basic um, foundational aspect of knowledge gap theory. What it says is those states or those people or those geographies which are wealthier and carry more educated people, they are likely to acquire information and have information and access to mass media than those who belong to the lower socioeconomic classes. They have greater access to media information and benefit from it. Therefore, as mass media grows, so too does this gap in knowledge between the higher and the lower social classes. The theory is also known as the knowledge gap hypothesis. Okay, so knowledge gap is between those people who belong to the higher strata of society and those people who belong to lower social and economic strata of the society. What does knowledge gap theory argue about? Knowledge gap theory argues that knowledge is distributed unevenly through society. So in the society, because of the existence of these two categories and the classes of people based on the socioeconomic conditions, knowledge is distributed. And this uneven distribution of knowledge and access to mass media is something that the knowledge gap hypothesis addresses. Information is more accessible to wealthier and more educated people than poorer people. This causes knowledge gap, and this knowledge gap widens. Okay, so more educated people tend to be more interested in and open-minded about learning, further widening the gap. So those people who have access to media, those people who have access to information, they tend to educate themselves more, and they tend to be more curious and more interested and open-minded in the terms of acquisition of knowledge about learning. And this kind of widens the gap because other people who do not have access to mass media information or information that comes out of a certain knowledge system, they are likely to be less interested in this because they don't have the know-how or the understanding to develop that interest in the first place. As mass media grew in the 20th century, so did the gap in knowledge between poor and rich, something that is extremely evident in and around when you try and observe what is happening in the society. You can figure out that how much this gap has widened between the rich and the poor. So the knowledge gap hypothesis theory was first proposed in the 1970 by three scholars. Please do remember their names. Philip Techno. He is an associate professor of journalism and mass communication in the University of Minnesota. George Donohue, professor of sociology, University of Minnesota, and Clarice Vollian, instructor in sociology, University of Minnesota. So these three University of Minnesota professors first postulated or proposed this theory in 1970s, and that was in a journal article on mass media flow and differential growth in knowledge. I quote, "As the infusion of mass media information into a social system increases, segments of the population with higher socioeconomic status tend to acquire this information at a faster rate than lower status segments, so that the gap in knowledge between those segments tend to increase rather than decrease." So how it is correlational in nature, that's something that they are reflecting upon. That as and when there is an increase in mass media information and infusion into our lives or into the social system that we are a significant part of, there is a certain segment of the society who has higher socioeconomic status. They tend to have more access to information and they acquire information at a lot faster pace than those people who belong to lower socioeconomic strata of society. And that leads to a gap between the knowledge system, that leads to a gap between the kind of information people are going to process and how they're going to disseminate that content. And this knowledge gap widens. What are the 5 key elements of knowledge gap? You have to understand. Let's look at it. So the scholars argue that a gap in knowledge between rich and the poor occurs because higher socioeconomic classes have advantages in the following areas. So we are going to look at what are the advantageous features which keeps them afloat in the market, which kind of creates a privileged position for them as far as learning and acquisition of knowledge is concerned because of mass media, information exchange and dissemination. The first thing is the communication skills. So people from higher economic sections of the society tend to be better educated in communication skills than people from the lower economic classes. So what communication skills does is it lends people to a space of access. In a physical setting, try and understand. In a physical setting, somebody who can communicate in a better way is likely to be accepted more than somebody who is reluctant to communicate because of a certain kind of lack of exposure, lack of confidence, baggages he or she carries. It could be because of the kind of social history that they have had over a period of time, or just the sheer lack of knowledge owing to dropping out of school, owing to doing some other odd jobs. So it depends, how you are born, raised, and what you want to become. So your communication skills matter. So those people who belong to the higher socioeconomic classes, they are trained subconsciously over a period of time to acquire better communication skills. And it is because of the communication skills, they tend to become confident and they try to integrate themselves into the society, which allows them in a space of acceptance. So better educated people statistically would have better reading and writing skills, learned thinking skills, speaking skills, comprehension skills. So basically, it kind of has a larger impact on your cognitive viability, on your cognizance. You can think better, you can read better, write better, you can speak better. Your comprehension skills, your understanding around the world and the worldviews would be better. They therefore are more capable of understanding the information presented to them in mass media. So, everything that we have discussed so far throughout the semester also tries to tell us that mass media allows us to educate, entertain, persuade, and influence, and it is largely happening through the kind of information that is passed on to us. And the pace at which, especially in the um, new digital age, the access to information has become a little more democratic, but the pace at which information is being loaded to you, dissemination can become a very complex process. So in such sort of a scenario, the faster you can understand and comprehend and process information, the better it will be for you in terms of knowledge acquisition. So this highlights the importance of reading and studying throughout your life. So some things that become extremely organic in nature. So what do the scholars talk about this communication skills? I quote, persons with more formal education would be expected to have higher reading and comprehension abilities necessary to acquire public affairs and science knowledge. See, these two things are extremely crucial when we talk about dissemination of knowledge and information through mass media. So one is acquisition of knowledge about public affairs, everything that happened, in the social domain, in the political domain, um, and then your scientific knowledge that allows you to develop a scientific temperament that allows you to have a better understanding, a cognitive understanding of everything that is happening in and around from a scientific objective point of view. So those people who get inducted into the formal educational and training atmosphere, they're expected to have better comprehension skills, better reading abilities, and that allows them to be placed socially in a better position, and they are likely to acquire more knowledge. Second key area to look at when we talk about knowledge gap is stored information. The scholars define stored information as existing knowledge resulting from prior exposure to the topic. So if I'm talking, for example, I'm talking about knowledge gap here. Somebody who has already read about knowledge gap is likely to have a better exposure to the topic because he or she has spent considerable amount of time reading this topic, exploring what are the ideas around this topic, maybe have contemporary examples to understand this. So your existing knowledge is coming to your help when you try to define what is happening across concepts. So this stays as a stored information, as a repository, because you have been exposed earlier to a certain kind of a topic. And this happens largely again with the higher people belonging to higher economic strata of the society, because they, over a period of time, very organically, they have been exposed to knowledge. Somebody, let's say, for example, somebody who has traveled to, let's say 5 countries or 10 countries abroad in their growing up years are likely to have better understanding, likely, okay, not necessarily that is the parameter, but likely to have a better understanding of the culture, of the history, and the geography of these places he or she has visited while growing up, as against somebody who has just acquired this sort of a knowledge or information through books or through videos or through e-learning resources or something, because this is not your first-hand experience. So the stored information or the repository of knowledge, your negotiation with the text, your negotiation with individually, your negotiations with that information system or knowledge system allows you to be in a better position as far as cognitive viability is concerned. So this sort of an exposure helps to store information. According to the theory, people who are more highly educated are likely to have had more exposure to a topic in the past. That's why we always encourage people to read horizontally than read vertically. You understand the horizontal reading versus vertical reading? When you read horizontally, you're trying to expand your knowledge base across disciplines. So just because you study mass media doesn't restrict you to study more about classical music, or if somebody is interested in archaeological remains or ruins as architecture or whatever, or quantum theory for that matter. So instead of compartmentalizing the knowledge system, instead of trying to restrict yourself to a particular profession, to a particular kind of studies, if you do broad reading, you would be knowledgeous across. So, and your exposure to a certain topic is going to add value to the kind of knowledge acquisition that you do. So this prior knowledge helps them to understand a topic when they're exposed to it by the media. So when you come across this through a certain kind of information that is passed on by media, you already are familiar with the setup. The relativity factor increases. What do they say? Persons who are already better informed are more likely to be aware of a topic when it appears in the mass media and are better prepared to understand it. Now when information comes out regarding, let's say, COVID-19 vaccination process, those people, those scientists who were working in this sector, trying to find out the vaccines, when information is passed on to us as common man or the consumers through the mass media, for them, they already know the topic because they're exposed themselves. So that their prior knowledge is going to help them understand a topic in a lot better way, and they're better prepared to understand the topic. Next point is relevant social contact. People with higher socioeconomic status tend to have more social contacts because their acceptance rate in the society is a lot higher. Like I said, if you have good communication skills, you are going to interact with more number of people. You're going to be placed in a better position where your exposure to different kind of social systems and structures and populations are going to allow you to have relevant social contact. More number of people would be interested to listen to you. More number of people would give you a patient hearing. So those kind of things happen when there is a certain kind of a social positioning you have. The social contacts are more likely to share information on topics that are only seen on social media or media across media for that matter. They are therefore more likely to have some prior experiences with the topic. And this happens all the time, right? Like the whole idea, let's say, for example, let's consider Game of Thrones as an example. Okay, now if 10 people are there within a certain group and circle, out of which 8 have seen Game of Thrones, and they are going to have a conversation, or they are having a conversation about the next episode, which is going to come next week or next month for that matter. Those 2 people who have not seen that, they lack that prior knowledge about this topic. They might not be able to relate, and the other 8 might not be able to relate to these 2. What is it? How can you not see Game of Thrones? And this is what happens exactly across topics. Just giving you an example. So this makes them primed to learn and understand the information that they have been exposed to. I mean, consider, let's say, the fear of missing out, FOMO. This whole thing of why did we come across such a social phenomenon called fear of missing out? That I need to have access to as much information as I can. Otherwise, I would not be defined as a cool person, or I would be defined as somebody who understands people and who people must understand. So subconsciously what is happening is we are always seeking validation from people, and your social contacts, your relevant social contacts are the ones who are going to offer you that kind of validation. So with more social contacts to provide relevant background information on a particular topic, people with higher socioeconomic status are also more likely to be able to identify false and inaccurate information on mass media. So there is a possibility that they might offer you something which is truthful in nature. They something which is based on a certain kind of a rationale, based on some kind of logical, to have some sort of a logical conclusion to this information. High socioeconomic status people have a greater number of reference group and more interpersonal contacts, which increase the likelihood of discussing public affair topics with others. Okay, this is Tickennor, Danoha, and Olian trying to offer you some sort of an understanding about relevant social contacts. What I say is those people who belong to the higher socioeconomic status, they are likely to have better, a greater number of reference group. What is reference group? Reference group where you can refer to other people, where there is constant flow of information and exchange of ideas with each other, and it happens at a very personal, interpersonal level, and that opens up a conversational atmosphere to discuss issues of critical importance, public affairs, things that is happening in and around the society, things that we tend to do often on social media these days. Next point is called selective exposure, acceptance, and retention. The selective exposure argument says that people with different educational levels or socioeconomic backgrounds choose to consume media differently. What does this mean? That those people who have different kind of educational level, for example, somebody who has studied intermediate, somebody who has done graduation, somebody who has done a PhD, and people who have been exposed over a period of time, different kind of educational systems and structures, and people who belong to socioeconomic backgrounds as diverse as it can get, they are likely to consume media differently. Likely to consume media differently means, let's look at the examples. People will pay more attention to news that is relevant to their hobbies and interests. Okay, for example, I had been a cricket fan, so I am more likely to be inclined towards cricket news, and I would find that news to be more relevant, or the analysis part to be more relevant than to, let's say, health communication news or news about the parliamentary affairs. So as against somebody who is interested to prepare for civil services, or somebody who is interested in the health communication sector. So depending on your hobbies, interests, ambitions, aspirations, people are going to pay attention to news and consume news accordingly. You rarely come across people who consume every kind of news. Within that also, they would have their favorites. They might or might not discuss those things. Then higher educated people are presumed to be more politically engaged. Why is this important to engage politically? Irrespective of whether on what side of the spectrum you are in, it is crucial that you have some sort of a political understanding, which might lead to have some sort of an engagement and opinion formation. I'm not saying everyone to be opinionated, but you are. So how you are placing yourself in that society um, is directly dependent on how educated you are. And when I say how educated you are, I'm not talking about merely getting degrees. I'm talking about a crucial critical engagement with the text, with people, having a holistic understanding about the world instead of um, just acquisition of degrees. Then women tend to gravitate more to soap operas, men towards sports. That's a stereotype, I know, but then that's also something that is coming from these researchers or the scholars, and that is also they put this statement forward in selective exposure, acceptance, and retention by doing this kind of research. Okay, that women are likely to gravitate to soap operas and men towards sports because sports still considered to be a very masculine engagement, and soap operas as a recreational activity, which women tend to watch more. And similarly, this selective exposure argument is seen in new media, where we only appear to be consuming media from our tribe. Okay, when I say our tribe, the tribe would refer to the kind of journalist you follow, the kind of news content you watch, and there is always a selective, you know, exposure to that, because you are restricting yourself to a certain kind of news because you like listening to that, or you necessarily agree with those journalists or the editors or those people who are part of this news consumption production process. Some people only watch Fox News while others watch MSNBC. So the difference in our media consumption habits will cause gaps in what we know and what we tend to believe. Okay, so your understanding is pretty one track in that sense. When you have a certain kind of media consumption habit, you are likely to develop a bias. Whether you are aware of that bias or not is a different thing, but you are likely to develop a bias based on those habits. They also argue that a persistent theme in mass media research is an apparent tendency to interpret and recall information in ways congruent with existing beliefs and values. Pay attention to this last line. Okay, recall information in ways congruent with existing beliefs and values. So our belief systems, our value systems are always, um, you know, always offered to us as a baggage which we try to negotiate with subconsciously and carry it along. So we tend to respect those beliefs and value systems as something which is so sacrosanct that nothing can filter out that, and we use that as a prism of understanding every kind of information that is passed on to us. So our interpretation and our recollection of information, which is offered through mass media, is largely through the existing belief systems. And because of this, we tend to recollect a certain kind of things, we tend to selectively expose ourselves, so on and so forth. Then the next point is media target markets. Different media have different target markets. Okay. For example, Pinterest predominantly women, Instagram skews towards younger people, print news skews towards older or higher educated people, daytime television skews towards older people. With such large amount of different media with their own niche target markets, the gap is only going to be growing in the area of new media. And in new media, this is what is happening. Right? You can notice the kind of switch that is happening. I'll give you my example. It'll be relatively easier to understand. When when uh, when Facebook was at its peak, we all kind of enjoyed, consumed, spent considerable amount of time building network, interacting with people, exploring different, facilities offered by Facebook to communicate and engage. And by then, the next lot of people, or the next generation for that matter, has already shifted to Instagram. Now, when we switch to Instagram, now our lack of interest in Facebook um, is something that bothers the previous generation who has now moved to Facebook. So look at how the crest and trough is formed here. In between, Snapchat came, so many other things came up, and people moved towards that. Then TikTok came and created such a huge, popular ruckus kind of a situation where every young person, or old person for that matter, just switched to a TikTok and um, those kind of content. So the more compartmentalized these markets become, the gap between understanding could also, because somebody who is like, for example, I don't know nothing about Snapchat, because I never use that, or for that matter, uh, the online games that people play these days. So I would remain, what would happen is I would remain somebody who is a laggard in regarding this sort of an information. The previous generation, when they are trying to understand the technology, and they're trying to engage with, create their own communities of individuals within Facebook and other things, they do make mistake, and we often are not very kind to them, and we tend to feel embarrassed sometimes. We tend to embarrass them. Sometimes we take offense that being our parents, how can you not know these things? And you are so generation X or whatever. I mean, sorry, uh, so much old, and you should not be here. Any kind of argument that happens, it's funny to look at it, but it just try to look at it objectively. It just tries to kind of create that wide gap between all of us, between us and our parents, between us and you guys. And then this is going to continue in that fashion unless that gap is breached. And media always has target markets because it's predominantly a profit-making institution. Okay, let's look at what are the ways to reduce the knowledge gap. In 1975, these scholars tried to find ways to minimize the knowledge gap. What did they do? They studied the knowledge of people in communities around Minnesota, because they belong to Minnesota University, and they found people living in those communities as good population to study. And the study was done between 1969 and 1975. From the research, what did they find? They found and presented three hypotheses on how to reduce this knowledge gap between those people who belong to the information poor community and the information rich community. First thing is the community impact. What does community impact mean? It would focus on issues that are relevant to the local community, and the everyday lives of normal people tend to arouse interest regardless of education levels. Okay, interest regarding information. Second part would be access to information. Third part would be the technology or the medium through which information can be passed on. The first thing is to kind of mobilize the crowd and have local communities respond to different kind of issues, and that impact or their lives or are relevant to their own communities, regardless of whether they're educated or not educated. So first thing is that, so which could be defined as community impact. Second is level of conflict. Issues that are hot button issues tend to engage more interest of people regardless of education levels, which may reduce the gap. This only works until the conflict boils over, after which people turn out of disgust. Anti-CA protest, the ongoing farmers protest. So these are hot button issues. Okay, or the corona crisis, the exodus, whatever. I mean, things that keep happening. Recently, the budget session got over. So these are topics that are discussed, irrespective of whether people know a great deal about it or they do not know. They tend to, have some sort of understanding regarding this. And when you try to gather people together, irrespective of their educational level, they are going to have some sort of communication or exchange of information regarding this. And when you move from topic to topic, you have discussion sessions. You carry out this sort of a group discussion around that is less likely to reduce this gap between the people. Then the next part is community homogeneity. A homogeneous community is one place where most people in the community are similar to one another in terms of race, social class, and culture. Homogeneous communities tended to have less of an information gap than heterogeneous communities. Something that is a no-brainer, because you have grown up within a certain community. You feel comforted, you feel secured, you feel protected. And you are not just protected from the alien invasions or from the foreign communities trying to exploit or pollute you, but within your own confines and your comfort zone, uh, there is a possibility of a certain kind of informational equality instead of informational gap. All of us know this much. Everybody studied till this much. All of us went. There will be 1920 sort of a scenario where a little more people within the communities would know a little more, but that is largely because of their curiosity and their interest in knowledge acquisition that they would tend to do so. But a larger possibility would be that more or less everyone will be on the same page as far as information is concerned, or information distribution and dissemination is concerned. This happens largely in homogeneous communities, whereas in heterogeneous communities, the information gap is a lot wider as against homogeneous communities. Okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses of knowledge gap theory? Okay, look at this and we'll close knowledge gap theory with this. What are the strengths? The first thing is the theory explains recent political polarization. As more forms of mass media emerge and people can pick and choose their media, the gap is only going to grow. Okay. This sort of a gap could be understood. What knowledge gap theory did is it offered a context to our understanding of how informational emergence leads to political polarization. Leads to an explanation of political polarization. That the fact that we can pick and choose our media, we can accordingly proceed. We don't need to follow just one track. The theory explains the limitation of mass media. The theory provides an apparent explanation for why information cannot be spread to all corners of the society through mass media alone, unless people become aware, unless people tend to engage themselves, like I told you. It's not the only, mass media cannot be the only tool through which information can be spread. Okay, the truthful thing is this: if we try to reach out as much of people and try to kind of reduce that gap and try to make that atmosphere a lot more democratic for consumption of information, but it doesn't happen alone. Different people consume different media, something that we have been speaking about. The scholars argue that the theory provides a fundamental explanation for the apparent failure of mass publicity to inform public at large. Because the attrition rate of reaching out to people is relatively less. The theory explains fake news. Okay, knowledge gap theory explains fake news. The theory can also explain a supposed link between lower educated people and their belief in fake news. And this is something that is extremely apparent, and you can see that happening. Those people who tend to believe in fake news are, they carry less of a rational, balanced point of view regarding information. They are likely to fall susceptible to the kind of information, because of the kind of baggages they carry, social, political, economic baggages. Some are self-induced, some are society-induced. Whatever may be the cause, but they are likely to believe in fake news more than others. So without access to relevant social contacts and stored information, these people are less capable of identifying and critiquing fake news. So when you show me fake news, I will be able to identify, because I have done that in-depth study of how fake news is created and propagated across the market. But somebody who doesn't belong to this, somebody who has not, who doesn't carry that kind of a stored information, or has not socially escalated himself or herself through education or through the kind of contacts that they would have, or the kind of exchange of information and ideas within communities, they are less likely to be able to identify and critique fake news. Okay. What are the weaknesses? The theory conflates socioeconomic status and education level. These terms are used interchangeably by the theory founders. What does this mean? That people tend to use knowledge gap theory left, right, and center. The terms correlate, okay, but are not the same thing. So the conflation is problematic. Where you're using this thing, how are you placing knowledge gap theory, and in what context you are placing knowledge gap theory? Are you trying to examine the socioeconomic status and education level of people across communities before using them interchangeably? If you're not doing so, then there is a problem, and this is something that has been critiqued as far as this theory is concerned. Knowledge gap theory may not be relevant today. A 50-year-old theory of media may fail to understand the complexity of media landscape today, especially in the digital era when the access to information has reduced quite a bit, if not to a large extent, but to a certain extent definitely has, because of the kind of access to media devices. The original article outlining this theory talks about newspaper as the dominant media form. So imagine how old would be the discourse at the first place, because then the dominant media form was newspaper. Now the dominant media form is new media, mobile technologies, OTT blogs, everything that is happening at this point in time as far as consumption is concerned. You know, newspaper has become a passive media. So the theory might not be extremely relevant today. The new media behaves differently. Similarly, new media has less gatekeepers than older media. Okay, traditionally, the information exchange, the flow of information and exchange was somewhere um, restricted because of the kind of gatekeeping that would happen, as against the newer form of media, because information tend to travel at a lot faster pace, and people who have access to information can multiply again at a much faster pace. I'll give you one small example before you close. This documentary film called India's Daughter, which was about the 2012 Delhi gang rape case, and quoted controversies, and it was uploaded. When it was uploaded on YouTube, um, it created a lot of controversy, and it was eventually banned, and YouTube had to take that film down. Before that, I had downloaded that documentary, you know, for screening purpose, and I somehow had a feeling that this film is going to be taken down by YouTube, because the kind of hate and kind of what do you say, the kind of hatredness that was spread around that, and the amount of flag that the documentary makers got because of this was too much. Okay, there's too much of toxicity around that, and without people getting into the context of argument, they were trolling it left, right, and center, and that ultimately had a pressure on the policymakers. The policymakers, anyway, were not too keen on confronting the idea of what the documentary was arguing about in the course of its content. So this was taken down, and I remember uploading it uh, across, I think in Vimeo and some other um, channels multiple times. So this happens, you know, people in the case of new media, the behavioral pattern of production and consumption can be extremely different. So you can use this a certain kind of content with bunch of people and try to reduce that sort of a knowledge gap, and in turn we subconsciously empower them, and they would take that baton forward, and if they have the intent to spread knowledge and try to reduce the gap between information poor and information rich, they can do so by using these mass media tools, or by using new media tools rather, I would say. Okay, so that's more or less what I wanted to talk about knowledge gap hypothesis, kind of linking it with information rich and information poor. And I'm going to talk a little more about it in the next session. So thank you so much. Let's stop here.